This is a story of unimaginable brutality and injustice. What I'm going to tell you is going to be hard for you to hear, and it's going to anger many of you. I'm going to tell you right now, this story does not have a happy ending at all. It's a story of nothing but pain and trauma and injustice. But it's a story that must be told anyway, because we have to make sure that those who suffered under the weight of oppression are not forgotten. This story represents what it means to be black in America. Jesse Washington was born around 1898, and he was the eldest of 12 children. He was described as being quiet and mentally disabled. In 1916, 17-year-old Jesse was working as a farmhand on the farm of George Fryer in Robinson, Texas, near Waco. On May 8, 1916, Chris Simmons was walking home that evening when he heard screams coming from the direction of the Fryer home. He ran to see what was going on, and when he got there, he discovered 22-year-old Ruby Fryer and her 14-year-old brother George Jr. He saw them staring at the lifeless body of their 53-year-old mother, Lucy Fryer. Her life had been brutally taken. After learning what happened, George Fryer, the husband, quickly drove to Waco and told Sheriff Samuel S. Fleming what had happened. Sheriff Fleming assembled a team of investigators and returned to the Fryers' farm to begin his investigation. The police immediately suspected 17-year-old Jesse and his brother William of being involved in this crime. Jesse and William had worked for the Fryers as hired hands since January of that year. Police went to Jesse's house and arrested his entire family. Everyone was eventually released except for Jesse. They kept him there to question him. Within hours of his arrest, Jesse was moved to jails in Hillsborough and then later in Dallas. The police told Jesse that they'd protect him if he just simply confessed to the crime. Believing that they'd keep him safe, Jesse signed a confession. Jesse's confession was published in all of the local newspapers, making it widely available and likely seen by any of the potential jurors. Because Jesse was illiterate and could not read or write the confession, he signed it with an X. Jesse's arrest and subsequent trial were really just a mere formality designed to appease the white community's demand for a swift and really harsh justice for Jesse. On Thursday, May 11, 1916, a McLennan County grand jury took just 30 minutes to return an indictment against Jesse for taking Mrs. Fryer's life. Judge Richard I. Monroe appointed attorneys for Jesse's defense and scheduled the trial for the following Monday, just a few days away. Jesse's trial was a complete sham. The court, the jury, and all the spectators were white, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was racially charged with hatred. The trial started at 10 a.m. The courtroom was completely filled with people from the community. Those that could not get a seat in the courtroom stood outside. As soon as Jesse was brought into the courtroom, one spectator pulled out a weapon and said that they might as well get Jesse right now. Someone else who was in the courtroom responded by saying that they should at least let the trial go forward and that they'd get Jesse before sundown. The trial lasted only a few hours. Jury selection took about 30 minutes. When the judge read the indictment to Jesse and asked him whether he pleaded guilty or whether he pleaded not guilty, Jesse was so confused he didn't even know what was going on. He simply said, "Yeah." Prosecutors called a doctor who testified about Mrs. Fryer's wounds, and he said that there was evidence that she had been violated. They also called the police officers who said that Jesse provided them with a detailed confession. Jesse's confession was then read aloud to the jury. Jesse's attorneys didn't put up much of a defense for him at all. They only asked one question of the prosecution's witnesses and opened and closed their case by calling Jesse as their only witness. The jury deliberated for just 4 minutes before finding Jesse guilty of taking Mrs. Fryer's life. As soon as the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted into chaos. As the judge was writing down the verdict into the record, someone yelled to get Jesse. A mob then seized Jesse and dragged him down the stairs and out of the courthouse, where a crowd of hundreds were already waiting for them. They put a chain around Jesse's neck, and then they dragged Jesse. They dragged him all the way to City Hall, where another group had already assembled and started to build a bonfire. As Jesse was dragged to City Hall, his clothes were ripped, and he was stabbed, and he was beaten with shovels and beaten with bricks and clubs. Once at City Hall, Jesse was beaten some more and stripped and chained to a tree in the city square, a site that was chosen for its central location and visibility. The mob, which had quickly grew to include over 20,000 people, prepared to carry out their own form of justice. They were not going to wait for what the court was going to hand down for Jesse. Jesse Washington's lynching was meticulously planned. It was an orchestrated event. The mob cut off his fingers and stripped him naked. They then poured oil over his body and set him on fire. As the flames engulfed Jesse, he tried to climb up the chain to escape the intense heat of the fire, but his tormentors repeatedly forced him back down into the fire. The mob's actions were brutal and systematic. They involved cutting off Jesse's fingers and cutting his toes off, and his ears, and his genitals before burning him alive. The crowd included men and women and children, highlighting just how lynching was a community affair. As Jesse burned, members of the mob cut off parts of his body as gruesome souvenirs. Some onlookers scoured the ground for keepsakes, collecting bones and pieces of the tree. Jesse's body was then later tied to a horse and dragged through downtown Waco. At one point during this dragging procession, Jesse's skull actually detached from his body. A group of young boys then took the skull and took teeth from it and sold the teeth for money. Jesse's body was then hung from a pole for the entire town to see. There are photographs of what happened that day, and I'm going to tell you right now, they are very gruesome, but they depict what happened. I can't show them here for obvious reasons, but you really should see these photographs. You should see what brutality looked like during this time period. See what black people experienced. I've included them on my blog. The NAACP sprung into action after this event. It wanted what happened to Jesse Washington to be a catalyst for change in terms of how black people were treated in Southern courts. It sent Elizabeth Freeman, an English suffragist and NAACP member, to investigate. Freeman was attending a convention in Dallas when she got the call from the NAACP. Her mission was simple. It was to investigate and to report the facts. Freeman went to Waco and she investigated what happened. She interviewed witnesses and she documented every gruesome detail. Her report painted a vivid picture of the brutality that Jesse faced and the complicity of local authorities who allowed this mob to act so freely. The NAACP published her findings in a special supplement of their magazine, The Crisis, which was edited by W.E.B. Du Bois. It was titled The Waco Horror. The report included graphic descriptions and photographs and exposed the savagery of what happened that day. Some have suggested that there's evidence that shows that Jesse might have taken Mrs. Fryer's life after he was tired of her berating him all the time. But to be honest, we don't know if that's what happened. We don't know because mob violence overtook justice and due process. Jesse never had a fair chance to defend himself or to present his side of the story. But his guilt or innocence should not be the focus. It's the brutality and the mob justice that Jesse Washington was subjected to that's the real injustice here. A 17-year-old mentally delayed child was subjected to unspeakable brutality and pain. Everyone came out to participate and celebrate it. And Jesse was not alone in this act of mob violence. Because what he went through, so many others also experienced this same mob violence during that time period. What happened to Jesse Washington is a powerful reminder of the brutal realities of racial violence in the American South. This history cannot be swept under the rug just because it's uncomfortable or some people don't want to hear it. These atrocities happened to real people in a time defined by racial violence, and we must talk about this. The same ideals that led to Jesse's sham trial and public execution are still present in our justice system to this day. Now, they take the form of stop and frisk and unjustified taking of black lives by police officers. They take the form of a death penalty system that disproportionately executes black people. They take the form of mass incarceration and unconstitutional policing, and so many more other injustices that I didn't talk about. I want to know your thoughts on this video. Had you ever heard of Jesse Washington, and how did it make you feel knowing everything that he went through? Share your comments and drop me a comment down below.